Welcome to the Stories That Shape Our Community. My name is Trevor Moore, and I'll be your host in this Southeast Alberta podcast series, where we explore the importance of putting local first and the power positive impact has on shaping our communities. These episodes are all about giving listeners a backstage pass as we explore the why behind these great local business stories. There is no one-size-fits-all approach in business, and these journeys are as unique as the people themselves. Our local guests will highlight the challenges, solutions, and philosophies they have employed to overcome adversity, showcase resilience, and have a positive and lasting impact in our community. Today we have Malcolm Sissons with us, who, probably being a little bit humble, doesn't claim to be a professional historian, but I've sat across from him a few times and he has so many great stories to tell. Shares some of them with us today in this podcast, a little bit about his life growing up here around IXL and IXL's imprint on our local area, community, region, and some of the international work we have. So sit back, relax. Welcome, Malcolm Sissons. Malcolm, it is great to have you here, episode 1 of the Stories That Shape Our Community. This podcast is designed to share the unique stories and the unique perspectives and sort of the backstage pass, if you will, into some of the businesses and some of the people in our community that have really helped sort of shape, mold, and put our community on the map for what it is today. When we look at that sort of perspective, one of the things that really jumps out at me is I love imagery and I love, metaphors and analogies. And this being sort of number 1 in our series of these 20 episodes, I love the fact that we're here at a brick plant because, bricks get used so often in the coaching world and in the speaking world. We talk about fundamentally laying a foundation and getting that first row of bricks down. And, bricks also symbolically really they weather adversity. They weather the storm so much better than a lot of other things. They're just adverse products that can really fight through. So I feel that when we look at IXL and we look at our community has had its challenges, right? With floods and famines and droughts and depressions and all these things that have gone through in the last, 60, 80, 100 years in our area. And at the end of the day, here's a brick plant and here's bricks. They still stand today. I think it's just great that we look at the foundations of our community and look at the foundations and building it around bricks. But that's the thing I love about the bricks. Tell us a little bit about Malcolm and your general, not the broad family look at it, but your involvement in IXL and some of your history here.
Well, personally, as a kid, I used to roam around here with my dog, usually on Saturday mornings, down onto the creeks or up on the cliffs or even through the plants. And got a little dusty that way, but I got to know the layout of the plant. And when we got tired, we'd go back into the office and beg 10 cents off my dad and go get a pop.
Back when 10 cents went a long way.
When 10 cents went a long way, yeah. So then I graduated to being the lawn cutter. And so the lawn around the office there was fairly large and used to grow quite quickly, and once a week you'd get out there and spend several hours cutting it and gathering up the lawn clippings. And after that, age 15, I started working in the plant, actually in this very room, on the shop crew, which meant that I was sort of expendable labor, and whenever they had a shorthanded crew, that I was usually tagged to go and help out. So even though I was on the shop crew, I ended up spending a lot of time unloading bricks and setting tile and that sort of thing. And just it carried on from there. I spent summers often working in one of the plants, and then I took a break, went away to university, and didn't even think about bricks or anything like that for quite a while. But as my dad and my dad and his brothers, my uncles, were getting on in years, which I think of getting on, they were probably only in their 60s or 50s even.
Perspective, right?
They put it pretty bluntly to my cousins and I as to whether, if we were thinking of coming back to the company, it would be a good time to do that, or else they'd have to go a different direction. So that's about when I started full-time permanent with the company in 1980.
When you're a multi-generational family business, it's amazing the wisdom that the young kids involved have, because they see and hear parts of the operation that a lot of the staff just aren't privy to. And is there times that in the history and the existence where there was big adversity and you guys plowed through?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So our family company started in Redcliffe, actually, at the Redcliffe Press Brick Company in 1912, and that carried on for some time. And in 1928, after getting through the First World War years, which were quite challenging, manpower shortages, the whole business, we bought this plant. But I was just reading some documents the other day where they figured they probably overpaid for what they got. It was in worse shape than what they figured it was. And by the time the smoke cleared and the dust settled, the Depression had started, and sales dropped off to the point by 1935 it was only operating like 1 month out of the year. So that was definitely a challenge. My granddad used to keep a cow down here for milk, and it was tough times. And the Second World War actually sort of picked things up a bit because there was a demand for building materials. So that was probably the first crisis. And I think in the 50s, my grandfather died in 49 unexpectedly, and so my dad and his two brothers and ended up running the plant as young men and with some ambition, and they stepped out and built the first tunnel kiln here, which was a pretty major step forward, and continued to build plants, new plants, additions to plants, modernizing equipment, and that carried on right through the 70s, where the biggest challenge was probably just keeping up with demand. And those were probably the good years, if you want to call them that, and brick was widely used, and then came the 1980s when I started. And don't blame me, it wasn't me, I didn't do it. But in fact, things changed dramatically. Our whole clay pipe business just sort of faded away in the matter of a few years. Plastic pipe came in, and then fireplaces, which were traditionally bricks, shifted over to being zero clearance metal. And so a lot of our, and a lot of institutional building sort of slowed down. So my challenge, much as my previous generations had been involved with building up and adding capacity, mine was reducing capacity to try and stay in tune with the marketplace. And so that was a real challenge for me. Those 80s and 90s were difficult.
So the term pivoting is not just a COVID term. Like, pivoting is clearly something you've had to do in your turn. You've seen society change from, as you said, plastic pipes and various things like that. Yeah. A lot of different things that go on. And sometimes on the outside looking in, we forget to realize just how businesses that are here today, the things they had to tweak and change behind the scenes that had big impacts. Is there any small things where you can think of where, we made this one small adjustment and it changed everything? Were all the pivots big? Were there some small ones? Were there some big ones that came out of little things?
I'd say a little bit of both. We kept modernizing, and the good side of that is that you can control your costs, your manufacturing costs that way, and hopefully stay ahead of the competition. But the bad side is that machines replace men, right? So our employment numbers sort of went from probably a peak of around 300 people employed in the local area to, by the end, a crew of 50 sort of thing. So
it's a big workforce adjustment right there.
It is indeed. And, over time, retirements take care of some of that. But for sure, there were some adjustments along the way. And I think that whereas in 1980, we were a brick manufacturing company, as we sit today, looking back on it, by the flood of 2010, brick manufacturing only represented 15% of what we did. And we did masonry products distribution, we had oil and gas, we had diversified into refractory products, house building, commercial properties. So that really, what started off as being a business here in Medicine Hat morphed into more of a Western Canadian type of operation with the headquarters in Medicine Hat.
So when you look back, I mean, obviously as a family operation, and one that there's a lot of deep pride in with your family, when you look back and when you look at the conversations you maybe had with your father and your uncles, and what would their thoughts be in terms of the legacy, in terms of the legacy that IXL has left in our community, in our region? Because it isn't just about the plant. It isn't just about the employment. I know you are also, so involved in the community and those types of things. What would be some of the things they'd be super proud of today to look back at that legacy?
Well, I would say that we're often tagged to contribute or donate, and oftentimes we would do that in the form of our product, which would essentially be there for all time, right? So if you look at the Esplanade, we donated the brick for the Esplanade, and it's there and it'll be there for a long, long time to come. And so oftentimes, whether it was the YMCA or just different projects, that would be something where we left our legacy, but in bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
And I would hate to ever say that dollars aren't appreciated, but sometimes a contribution goes beyond dollars, and it's sort of, you put your heart and soul into it, if you like.
Yeah, for sure, right? I mean, community involvement isn't just about writing a check or donating the dollars. It's about having the passion to see the project through and support it and be a big part of that. And now, in terms of looking at community involvement and just your passion for the community, are there any projects that really jump out at you? Are any projects that you really look at and think, IXL played a really big role in that and helped push that forward? Is there any that you're really proud of?
Well, the Esplanade was one that I took a personal role in, as did my cousin, and we walked through it. There's a certain amount of controversy about the brick color chosen, and let's just say that it probably didn't come to mind when we offered to donate the brick that it would be a gray brick that was chosen. But once the offer was made, you're in it, and it stands out, I guess, in a red brick downtown. We're involved with a number of the big institutional projects, and they're kind of in your face all the time. But I kind of like some of the smaller scale projects. Probably one of my favorites is the Ewart Duggan House downtown. It's the very first brick that were made right here on this site, the oldest brick house in Alberta. I look at each brick in that building and say each one of those was made by hand and installed by hand, and it's still there. And so to me, even though I wasn't personally involved with that part of it, our company in later years was, when we acquired it and then donated it to the city. And it was, I look at that as being symbolic, really, of our whole industry. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about our company, because there were like 10 different brick operations in this area at one time and another.
It's interesting. I didn't know the history of the house. Now, so it's obviously changed. When you talked about some of the handmade bricks, what is some of the innovative changes? Because when you look at the product itself, from a consumer's perspective, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of innovation that's changed. Brick seems like brick, but clearly there has been some innovation that's created the sustainability to brick. Take me through some of the innovation behind the scenes that's happened in the process of production and those types of things.
Well, back in the day, a brick was a solid unit, and so coring brick was one of the first sort of significant innovations, I'd say. And it was done for reasons of improved productivity, drying, and lighter, less material used, less gas used in firing it, all sorts of good reasons. So that was, but basically it's still a brick. Yeah. And I would say the method of manufacture of bricks, we branched out. I mean, back until 1949, it was a bit like Henry Ford and his Model Ts. You could have any color brick you wanted as long as it was red. So in the late 40s, we discovered some clay deposits in the Cypress Hills that allowed us to make buff brick. And then from there, particularly in the 50s and 60s, we discovered all sorts of deposits which allowed us to come up with a whole range of colors that many other brick operations couldn't. And that allowed us in later years, when our local market thinned out, to ship brick as far east as Washington, D.C., as far west as Japan, and it's all because of unique manufacturing characteristics. So whereas in 1950, we were a typical brick plant, over the years, brick plants, particularly in the East, got bigger and bigger and specialized in high volume, low cost production. We almost went the other way and became a job shop where we made smaller quantities but of unique products, and that allowed us to market much further afield. So the IXL name was really got quite widespread compared to a typical brick company.
So it was a very custom sort of operation in some respects. You were able to build, one-off projects with bricks that just weren't going to be seen in your neighbor's fireplace mantle and weren't going to be seen at the fence down the road. Yeah. Interesting. Now let's go back to when you came back out of college or university and you had that conversation about if you're going to step back in, maybe now's the time, Malcolm. And, can you think back, what was the why? What drew you back in? What made you want to, go all in IXL and come back to this? What was pulling in your heart?
Well, I'd started a family, and I was living in Edmonton at the time, and life in Edmonton was, thinking forward to what it would be like. It wasn't as interesting maybe as what I remembered of Medicine Hat. Now, Medicine Hat had changed quite a bit. I left in 1972 just as the big population expansion took place, and so even though I'd continued to visit, it wasn't the same town I left when it was 25,000 plus or minus for year after year after year. It was a bigger town, and but in hindsight, the quality of life here was just superb, and we never regretted that ever. Yeah. So that quality of life aspect was one thing. The idea of working with my father and my uncles and my cousins, that was interesting too. I mean, we'd grown up as a fairly close family here, so lots of family dinners, and my two cousins were the same age as me. I've got a nice photograph of the three of us dressed in our Blackhawk hockey uniforms up at the Hill rink there. We were the Tiny Mike Blackhawks. We must have been the Sissons line, I guess.
Back when it was an outdoor rink, probably still.
When it was and sometimes it was cold. But so that family, working with family is something that you could get your hands on and know that, it had a long tradition too. Like, I've always been a history nut, and so my father and uncles, they were really good about talking about the past, and you had that connection going right back.
Nice. So you were drawn right in. And I love that you pointed the size of the community and the family opportunities in a smaller city and those types of things. And I'm guessing at some point in time when you look at IXL's sort of thrusting themselves into the community, it's obviously an important part for you, both as families, but as business. You obviously have made an effort to have inroads in the community and be a part of the community. For businesses that are out there looking to get into business right now or starting into business, how critical was that for the success of IXL, both at the start as well as long-term and longevity, to be threaded within the community and be a contributing member to it?
I think probably in a smaller community, the relationships between suppliers and customers are probably closer and more long-term. Mm-hmm. Certainly in a bigger city, there's quite a bit of turnover in different roles. People move from job to job, and whereas here, I think it's not so much. And so you develop those long-term relationships which embed you really in the community. And I know my dad and his brothers were all three of them in service clubs and involved with the church and all of those things that develop that network of community relationships.
Yeah, and those are at the foundation of so much business networking and relationships. And as I love that you cued in, it's probably bigger in small towns, and it really is, right? I mean, when your biggest customer lives a block away, it's a different conversation than, you end up in a bigger city. It's just sort of a commodity who can get me the product as fast as possible for the cheapest price, and it's a little bit less relationship oriented in some of the bigger centers, isn't it?
True.
Now, when you start in this Medicine Hat area and you build this like relationship style and you build and embed yourself in the community and have success with it, let's flip this as IXL grows internationally. Let's get outside of the community. Certainly some of those strategies had to be modified to adapt to going into that global market. What types of changes needed to take place for you to adapt, but still stay true to those principles where you felt like relationships were important?
Well, there's no doubt that business culture varies by region. I know that when we started selling significant quantities of brick into Ontario, payment back would be less 2%. And we said, well, what's this about? Our terms are clear. You get 30 days and you pay the invoice. And then, oh, well, yeah, we took the 2% prompt payment. And I said, well, those aren't part of our terms. And they said, well, it doesn't matter. That's what we do down here. And I said, but you didn't pay promptly. You still paid in 30 days. So the lesson learned is just add 2% to your bill because they're going to take it anyway.
The addition and subtraction on the back end.
And that was quite different from what we were used to out here. And I'd have to say that I had a few experiences where, there was nothing wrong with the brick, but there was something wrong with the brick, and we need a price deduction here. Mm-hmm. It just no, that's not how we do business. Well, that's how we do business. So you had to sort of sort your way through some of the differences in business relationships that vary quite a bit from one part of the country to the other. I mean, generally speaking, in small towns in Western Canada, it's, a handshake is a deal, and that's how you do business.
It's all done in the whites of the eyes. Yeah. You look each other in the eyes and shake hands, and it's there. And there's still so much. There's so much about that I value. You know what I mean? Even though the paper has to go behind the scenes, but there's still so much about that handshake and hearing the person breathe and seeing them in the eyes. So when you go back and you look at your time at IXL and where IXL is today, what feelings do you get? What does that bring for you when you look at the impact and what you've done and what you've achieved as a company, both for yourselves, for your employees, as well as for the community? What sensations do you get?
Well, I always felt that we made a product unlike most other products. First of all, manufacturing in Western Canada is not what it used to be. It used to be manufacturing in every town, and now it's largely disappeared. But if you made drywall or paint or door handles, I mean, those things go into a building and you sort of forget about them. With brick, I can drive through any city in Western Canada and identify the brick, which plant it came out of, approximately when it was manufactured. So, I mean, that I have that, which is a sort of a connection to my product that probably most manufacturers couldn't say, and knowing that it'll probably be there forever.
Yeah, there's a long thread to you and your clients. You'd have an interesting long-term relationship with the product.
We have one fatal flaw. Once it's built, you don't need to replace it.
Yeah, that's right. It's too good a product. It's not the GE light bulb. It doesn't burn out, doesn't need to be replaced.
No.
That is a fatal flaw, but I guess it's a positive flaw to have. Malcolm, great to have you. Thank you so much for sharing these stories with us and walking through this. I love what IXL has done in this community. I love that they've laid the bricks both physically and figuratively to create inroads in this community. I mean, it's probably not by accident that when you said, you left at 25,000 people here and then this population explosion, it's businesses like IXL that bring people, bring business, bring buildings and those types of things. So I'm sure you had a huge part in shaping this community. And that is why we are happy to have you here, Malcolm, on day one, episode 1 of this podcast, setting the groundwork and setting the bricks in play for the rest of the episodes. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, you're very welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you to our podcast sponsor, the Medicine Hat District Chamber of Commerce, who is fueling the business community in Southeast Alberta. Through connections, support, and influence, they are driven to shape our community. Their hope is that this podcast will help you fuel your passion for supporting local first. To learn more about the Medicine Hat District Chamber of Commerce or to watch more episodes of the stories that shape our community, please visit their website, medicinehatchamber.com/stories that shape our community. In addition, please follow us on your favorite podcast streaming app so you don't miss any of the unique stories we share, the inspiring guests who share them, and the impact they have had on Southeast Alberta. Stories are all around us. We just need to connect to be able to share them. If you want to be featured on this podcast with a story of your business or organization, or if you know of a story that should be shared, please submit a nomination through the Chamber website. Thank you for listening today. We look forward to sharing more stories with you that help shape our community. I'm Trevor Moore, the host of Stories That Shape Our Community, and I challenge you all, be sure to help shape our community through your own story.